72-year-old woman forgets names, repeats stories, and wanders her house at 3 in the morning. The doctors say dementia. The family accepts the diagnosis. But when an envelope arrives in her name, marked with a symbol no one recognizes, everything begins to crumble, because Margaret Hayes isn't losing her memory. She's protecting secrets that could destroy entire governments. For 40 years, Margaret lived as an ordinary librarian in Portland, Oregon. Tea at 5, knitting on Sundays, polite smiles for the neighbors. No one ever suspected that decades ago, she was one of the most lethal intelligence agents of the Cold War, an assassin trained in unbreakable codes and elimination techniques that never made it into the history books. Now someone from the past has returned, and they want what Margaret hid. A code that can unlock files that entire governments try to erase. But there's a problem. Margaret really is starting to forget. The line between her performance and reality is blurring, and while her daughter tries to commit her to a nursing home, Margaret must decide, reveal who she really is and put her family in mortal danger, or let the world believe she's just a confused old woman. What happens when the woman everyone underestimates is actually the most dangerous person in the room? How do you hide a lifetime of assassinations, secret missions, and buried codes inside a mind that might actually be failing? And more importantly, when the past comes to collect, how far will a mother, grandmother, and former spy go to protect those she loves? Margaret Hayes stood in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning, staring at the coffee maker, as if she'd never seen it before. Her daughter, Rebecca, watched from the doorway, concern etched across her face like a sculpture of worry that had been there too long. "Mum, you okay?" Margaret blinked slowly, her hand hovering over the machine. I can't remember how this works." Rebecca rushed over, gently guiding her mother to a chair. "It's okay, Mom. Sit down. I'll make it." This wasn't the first time. 3 weeks ago, Margaret forgot her neighbor's name, a woman she'd known for 15 years. 2 weeks ago, she left the stove on for 4 hours. Last week, she asked Rebecca the same question 7 times in one afternoon. "Have you seen my reading glasses?" The medical appointment came quickly. Dr. Patricia Coleman, a neurologist at Oregon Health Sciences University, ran tests, memory assessments, cognitive evaluations, brain scans that hummed and clicked, while Margaret lay perfectly still, her eyes closed, her breathing controlled in a way that no dementia patient could manage. The diagnosis arrived like a sentencing. "Early-stage dementia, possibly Alzheimer's," Dr. Coleman said, her voice professionally sympathetic. "We caught it relatively early. With medication and support, we can slow the progression," Rebecca cried in the parking lot. Margaret held her daughter's hand and made soothing sounds, playing the role of the confused but loving mother who didn't quite understand what was happening. But that night, alone in her bedroom at 2:17 in the morning, Margaret Hayes moved differently. She stood before her full-length mirror and executed a sequence of movements that her body remembered like breathing. Strike combinations, defensive blocks, pressure point attacks, each motion precise, controlled, decades of muscle memory flowing through limbs that were supposed to be failing. Then she sat at her desk and opened a notebook hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice, pages filled with symbols, coordinates, dates, a cipher system she'd created 43 years ago in a basement in East Berlin. She wrote 3 lines of code, then burned the page and flushed the ashes down the toilet. The forgetting was a performance, the most important performance of her life. But 2 days later, something happened that Margaret hadn't planned for. She was in the produce section of Fred Meyer, examining tomatoes with the careful attention of someone who had nothing more important to do, when a man appeared beside her. Mid-50s, grey hair, glasses, completely unremarkable except for the way he stood. Balanced, ready, aware of every exit. He picked up an avocado and spoke in Russian, his voice barely above a whisper. "Solovey poyot na rassvete." The nightingale sings at dawn. It was a phrase from 1982, a recognition code from an operation in Prague that officially never happened. Margaret's hand trembled, not from fear but from the effort it took not to react properly. She turned to him with confused eyes and said in English, "I'm sorry. I don't understand." The man studied her face for 5 long seconds. Then he smiled, apologized for the confusion, and walked away. Margaret bought her tomatoes. She drove home carefully, obeying every traffic law. She made small talk with Rebecca about dinner plans. But that night, she didn't sleep at all. Because the Nightingale Code meant one thing: someone knew she was alive, someone knew where she was, and someone wanted what she'd spent 40 years hiding. The next morning, Margaret accidentally left her purse at the grocery store. Rebecca drove her back to retrieve it. While her daughter spoke with customer service, Margaret reviewed the security camera angles, memorized the staff schedules, and identified 3 potential surveillance positions. Old habits weren't just dying hard, they were refusing to die at all. And somewhere in the back of her mind, the part that wasn't performing, the part that was genuinely starting to struggle with names and dates and the difference between Tuesday and Thursday, Margaret Hayes wondered if she was running out of time, not just from whoever found her, but from her own failing mind. The war between who she was and who she'd become was no longer theoretical. It was happening inside her skull, neuron by neuron, memory by memory. And the most dangerous question wasn't whether she could fool her family. It was whether she could still fool herself. If you want to know what happens when Margaret's past collides with her present, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that like button, leave a comment telling us what you think so far, and share this story with someone who loves a good mystery. Because what's coming next will change everything you think you know about Margaret Hayes. The stranger from the grocery store? He was just the beginning. And the envelope that arrives in Chapter 2 contains something that will force Margaret to make an impossible choice, one that no mother should ever have to make. Rebecca Hayes Morrison had always considered herself observant. As a forensic accountant, she made her living finding patterns in numbers that other people missed. But somehow, she'd missed everything about her own mother. It started with the leak. A water stain appeared on Rebecca's bedroom ceiling. She'd been staying with Margaret for the past month, ever since the diagnosis. The plumber said it was coming from the attic crawl space. "Probably a loose shingle," he explained. "I can check it out if you want." Rebecca declined. She could handle it herself. The attic was exactly what she expected: dusty, hot, filled with boxes of Christmas decorations and old tax returns. But in the far corner, behind a stack of National Geographic magazines from the 1980s, she found something that didn't belong: a military footlocker, locked. Rebecca brought it downstairs while Margaret was napping. The lock was old, but sturdy. She felt guilty, but the accountant in her needed answers. She picked the lock using a tutorial she found online. It took 40 minutes and 3 broken bobby pins. Inside, she found a life she didn't recognize. Passports, 5 of them. Same face, her mother's face, younger, sharper, but different names. Catherine Wright, Elena Volkov, Marie Duchamp, Sarah Mitchell, Margaret Hayes. Her mother's real name was listed last, as if it was the alias. Beneath the passports, notebooks. Dozens of them. Filled with handwriting Rebecca recognized as her mother's, but containing content that made no sense. Symbols that looked like a mix of Cyrillic, mathematical notation, and something else entirely. Dates spanning from 1979 to 1991. Names, some crossed out in red ink, and photographs. Her mother, maybe 25 years old, standing beside men in military uniforms. Her mother in Berlin, the wall visible in the background. Her mother shaking hands with someone whose face had been carefully cut out of the image. Rebecca's hands shook as she pulled out the last item, a newspaper clipping from 1983. Soviet diplomat found dead in Vienna hotel, suspected heart attack. Someone had circled the diplomat's photograph and written in the margin, in her mother's handwriting, "Confirmed, exfil successful." The notebook slipped from Rebecca's fingers. She heard movement downstairs, her mother's voice calling up, "Rebecca, are you up there, sweetheart?" Rebecca shoved everything back into the footlocker and pushed it behind the magazines. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. When she came downstairs, Margaret was in the kitchen making tea, humming softly, looking every bit like the confused, gentle woman who forgot how to use the coffee maker. "Did you find the leak?" Margaret asked. "Not yet," Rebecca lied. "Still looking." That night Rebecca couldn't sleep. She sat in bed with her laptop and started searching. She typed in the first name from the passports. Catherine Wright. Nothing significant. Elena Volkov. Dozens of results, but none that matched. Then she tried one of the names from the notebook. A man named Dmitry Volkov, with a date beside it. November 12th, 1981. The search result made her stomach turn. Dmitry Volkov, KGB officer, found dead in safe house fire, Brussels, 1981. Suspected Western intelligence operation. Rebecca's hands trembled as she typed another name. Peter Strauss, March 3rd, 1984. East German official dies in car accident. Brake failure suspected. Another name, another death, another accident. 17 names total, 17 deaths between 1979 and 1991, and her mother's handwriting beside each one. Rebecca closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. Her mother, the woman who cried during commercials about rescued puppies, who volunteered at the library literacy program, who sent birthday cards with $5 bills to every niece and nephew, had a notebook documenting 17 deaths. No, not documenting, confirming. The next morning, Rebecca confronted her. She laid the footlocker on the kitchen table while Margaret ate oatmeal with sliced bananas. "Mum, we need to talk." Margaret looked at the footlocker. Her expression didn't change. "Where did you find that?" "The attic." "Mum, what is this?" "Old things. From a long time ago. These passports have your face, different names, and these notebooks. Mom, there are names here. Dead people. 17 dead people." Margaret set down her spoon very carefully. When she looked up, something had changed in her eyes. For just a moment, Rebecca saw someone else entirely. Someone sharp, someone dangerous. Then it was gone, replaced by confusion. I don't remember those. Maybe they were your father's. He worked for the State Department, you know. Maybe he brought them home. Dad was a trade negotiator. He didn't carry 5 passports with other women's names. Did I ever tell you about the time your father and I went to Vienna? Margaret's voice had that dreamy, drifting quality that appeared more and more lately. Such a beautiful city. We stayed near the Opera House. Or was it Prague? I can't quite... "Mom, stop!" Margaret blinked. "Stop what, sweetheart?" Rebecca wanted to scream. Instead, she gathered the passports, closed the footlocker, and said quietly, "I'm going to figure this out." "Figure what out?" "Who you really are." Margaret smiled sadly. "I'm your mother. That's all I've ever been." But that night, Rebecca heard sounds from her mother's bedroom. Soft, rhythmic thuds, like someone hitting a heavy bag. When she cracked open the door, Margaret was asleep, snoring softly, her hands folded peacefully on her chest. The sounds had stopped. Rebecca stood in the doorway for 10 minutes watching her mother breathe, and wondering what else she'd been missing her entire life. The next day the envelope arrived. It was addressed to Margaret Hayes, no return address, postmarked from Seattle. Inside, a single photograph of Margaret from 1982 standing in front of the Berlin Wall. And on the back, written in block letters, "We know what you hid. We know it's still active, 72 hours. Rebecca showed it to her mother. Margaret looked at it for a long time. Then she did something Rebecca had never seen her do. She laughed. Not a confused laugh, not a nervous laugh. A cold, calculating laugh that sent ice water down Rebecca's spine. 72 hours, Margaret said softly. How perfectly dramatic. Mum, what does this mean? Margaret looked at her daughter, and for the first time since the diagnosis, she dropped the mask completely. It means, sweetheart, that I need to teach you how to disappear. What you've just heard is only the beginning of Margaret's unraveling secrets. But here's what we want to know from you. If you discovered your parent had hidden an entire lifetime from you, could you ever trust them again? Would you want to know the truth, or would you rather live with the lie? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, we're just getting started. Chapter 3 will take you back to Margaret's past, and you'll finally understand exactly what she was trained to do, who she worked for, and why the code she created was so dangerous that governments tried to kill her for it. Stay with us. Berlin, December 1979. The city was split like a wounded animal, half of it bleeding capitalism, the other half suffocating under concrete and ideology. Margaret Hayes, then known as Catherine Wright, was 23 years old and had killed her first target 6 weeks earlier. She'd vomited afterward, behind a dumpster in Prague, shaking so hard she thought her bones might crack. Her handler, a man named Jack Devereaux, had waited patiently, smoking a cigarette, until she was finished. "It gets easier," he'd said. He was right. By the time she arrived in Berlin, Catherine Wright could eliminate a target with the clinical efficiency of someone checking items off a grocery list. The agency had found her during her senior year at Georgetown. Exceptional language skills, photographic memory, a strange talent for disappearing into crowds. They'd tested her psychological profile 17 different ways. The results were clear. She could compartmentalize trauma better than anyone they'd ever seen. Perfect for the work. Her cover was simple: American graduate student researching Cold War literature. She rented a small apartment in West Berlin, attended lectures at the Free University, and twice a week crossed into the East through Checkpoint Charlie, carrying books and academic papers that hid microfilm and coded messages. The kills came irregularly. An East German official who was about to expose a double agent, a Soviet military attaché who'd discovered a CIA safehouse, a Polish intelligence officer who'd captured one of their own. Catherine made them all look like accidents. But in April of 1982, everything changed. She was activated for a mission unlike anything she'd done before. The target wasn't a person, it was information. The briefing took place in a safe house in West Berlin, a fourth-floor apartment that smelled like old cigarettes and fear. Jack Devereaux laid photographs across the table. "We've confirmed the existence of Operation Zlato," he said. "Gold in English. It's a joint KGB Stasi program that's been running since 1975. They've been documenting every illegal operation, every assassination, every blackmail scheme run by both sides, East and West, for the past 7 years." Catherine studied the photographs. Why would they document their own crimes? Insurance. Leverage. If anyone tries to eliminate the program, these files get released to international media. It's mutually assured destruction, Information Edition. Where are the files? That's the problem. They're not in one location. They're scattered across 12 different sites in East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union. But there's a master index, one document that tells you where everything is hidden, and we've located it. Jack slid another photograph across the table. A man in his 60s, grey beard, thick glasses. Professor Anton Resnick, Soviet linguistics expert, stationed at Humboldt University in East Berlin. He created the cipher system that protects the index. Without his code, the index is worthless, just random numbers. You want me to acquire the code? We want you to become his student, get close, learn the system, and when the time is right, extract the information. And then? Jack's expression hardened. And then Professor Resnick has a tragic heart attack. The code dies with him. The index becomes inaccessible. Operation Zlato collapses. Catherine Margaret felt something cold settle into her chest. You're asking me to kill a teacher. I'm asking you to protect thousands of operatives whose lives will be destroyed if those files ever surface, including yours. She took the assignment. For 8 months, Catherine became Anton Resnick's most dedicated student. She attended his lectures on computational linguistics. She brought him tea during office hours. She listened to his stories about his grandchildren in Moscow. And slowly, carefully, she learned his cipher system. It was extraordinary, not based on mathematics or computer algorithms, but on personal memory. Anton had created a code that used specific details from his own life: birthdays, addresses, childhood memories, emotional moments, as the encryption key. It was impossible to crack unless you knew him intimately, unless you became someone he trusted. By December, Catherine knew the system. She could recreate it. She could access the index. And Jack Devereaux ordered her to complete the mission. The night she was supposed to kill Anton Resnick, Catherine sat across from him in his cramped university office. He was grading papers, occasionally glancing up to smile at her. "You remind me of my daughter," he said in Russian. "She asked questions like you, always wanting to understand the why, not just the how." Catherine's hand was steady as she prepared the injection, a compound that would mimic cardiac arrest, undetectable in a routine autopsy. She'd done this before. It would take 30 seconds, but then Anton said something that stopped her cold. "I know what you are." Catherine's training kicked in. Denial, misdirection, prepare for combat. But Anton just smiled sadly. "I've known for months. Your Russian is too perfect, your questions too specific. You're very good, Catherine. But I've been in this game longer than you've been alive." She should have killed him immediately, should have eliminated the threat. Instead, she asked, "Why didn't you report me?" "Because I'm tired." Anton removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Tired of the lies. Tired of watching people die for information that will never see daylight anyway. The index you want, it's already obsolete. Both sides have been destroying evidence for years. By the time anyone tried to use it, most of the targets would be dead or disappeared. Then why protect it? I don't protect it. I protect my grandchildren. If I give you the code, if I let this operation collapse, the people who run Zlato will assume I betrayed them. My family will pay the price. They sat in silence for 3 minutes. Then Catherine made a decision that would define the rest of her life. What if the code died with you, but you didn't die? Anton looked up sharply. What if you had a heart attack tonight but survived? What if you were so traumatized, so compromised, that you could never work again? What if you retired to a dacha outside Moscow with your medical pension, too fragile to be questioned? They'd never believe. They would if I made it real enough. If I gave you the injection, but only half the dose. If I called the ambulance myself. If I stayed by your side, the concerned student, and made sure everyone saw how devastated I was. Anton studied her face. And the code? You teach me the complete system tonight. Every detail. Every memory that unlocks it. And then tomorrow you have your heart attack. The code stays in my head. I disappear. Your family stays safe. And Operation Zlato has to find another way to protect their files. And what will you do with my code? Catherine smiled for the first time in months. I'm going to bury it so deep that no one will ever find it. Not the CIA, not the KGB, not anyone. It'll be my insurance, my leverage, my way out of this life. Anton Resnick considered this. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a bottle of vodka. Then we have a long night ahead of us, Catherine. I hope your memory is as good as you claim. For 6 hours, Anton Resnick taught Margaret Hayes the most sophisticated cipher system ever created. Not just the mechanics, but the soul of it. The memories that formed its foundation. The emotional architecture that made it unbreakable. And at 4:30 in the morning, Margaret gave Anton half a dose of the cardiac compound, called the ambulance, and held his hand while he gasped and trembled and played the role of a dying man. He survived, he retired. And Margaret Hayes carried his code in her head for the next 43 years. She never told the agency what really happened. She reported that Resnick died before she could extract the complete system, but that she'd memorized enough to access the index. She used that partial information to advance her career, to take on bigger missions, to become indispensable. And then, in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Cold War ended, Margaret Hayes did something extraordinary. She disappeared, faked a car accident in Prague, let the agency believe she was dead, created a new identity, her real identity, the girl she'd been before Catherine Wright, and moved to Portland, Oregon. She became a librarian, met a kind man named Robert Morrison, had a daughter named Rebecca, and never told anyone about the code that could still, even decades later, unlock secrets that governments had tried to erase, until someone found out she was alive. We want to take a moment to thank you for staying with us this far. You're the kind of viewer who doesn't just watch stories, you feel them. And trust us when we say the best is still coming. Because in the next chapter, someone walks through Margaret's front door. Someone who knows exactly who she is, and the choice Margaret makes in the next 60 seconds will determine whether her daughter survives the night. Don't go anywhere. This is where everything explodes. The man who came to kill Margaret Hayes arrived on a Wednesday afternoon disguised as Salvation. Rebecca opened the door to find him standing on the porch with a clipboard and a professionally sympathetic smile. Mid-40s, clean cut, wearing scrubs, and a lanyard that identified him as David Richardson, Senior Care Specialist, Cascade Home Health Services. Ms. Morrison, I'm here for the intake assessment. Your mother's doctor referred us? Rebecca had no memory of requesting home health services, but the past few weeks had been a blur of medical appointments and insurance paperwork. It wasn't impossible that she'd missed something. Of course, come in. David Richardson entered Margaret Hayes's home like water, flowing into a container, smoothly, inevitably, filling every space. He asked appropriate questions about Margaret's medication schedule, her dietary restrictions, her sleeping patterns. He examined the house with professional thoroughness, noting potential fall hazards, checking bathroom safety features, measuring doorway widths for wheelchair accessibility that wouldn't be needed for years. But Rebecca, trained to spot anomalies in financial data, began noticing things that didn't quite fit. The way David's eyes lingered too long on the books in Margaret's study, how he opened drawers in the kitchen under the guise of checking for organizational systems, but seemed to be searching for something specific. The fact that his questions about Margaret's past were unusually detailed. Where did she work before retirement? Did she travel internationally? Does she have any old records we should be aware of in case of emergency? And most tellingly, the way he moved, too balanced, too aware, like someone who'd trained their body to react before their brain could process threat. Rebecca had seen that bearing before, in her mother. Margaret was in the garden when David arrived. She came in through the back door, dirt on her hands, wearing the wide-brimmed hat that made her look like someone's harmless grandmother. "Oh, we have a guest." "Mum, this is David Richardson. He's here to do an assessment for home care services." David extended his hand. Margaret shook it, her grip frail and uncertain. "How lovely. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a mess. Gardening, you know." "Not at all, Mrs. Hayes. I'd love to ask you a few questions if you have time." They sat in the living room. David pulled out assessment forms, his pen clicking in a steady rhythm. He asked about Margaret's memory, her confusion episodes, her daily routines. Margaret played the role perfectly. She forgot what day it was. She called Rebecca by her sister's name. She didn't have a sister. She got up twice to ask if anyone wanted tea, forgetting she'd already offered. But Rebecca was watching David's face, and she saw something that made her blood cold. He wasn't buying it. His eyes tracked Margaret with the focus of someone watching a cobra, not a confused elderly woman. When Margaret stumbled over a word, David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When she laughed at her own forgetfulness, his fingers flexed against his clipboard. The assessment ended after 40 minutes. David promised to send his recommendations within 3 business days. He shook Rebecca's hand, smiled at Margaret, and left through the front door. Rebecca watched through the window as he walked to his car. A rental, she noted, not a company vehicle. He sat in the driver's seat for 3 minutes before starting the engine, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression hard. She turned to her mother. Margaret was still standing in the middle of the living room, but everything about her had changed. Her posture was straight, her eyes were sharp, the tremor in her hands had vanished completely. "Mum?" "Lock the doors," Margaret said quietly. "Front and back, kitchen window too, the latch is loose." "What?" "Do it now, Rebecca." Something in her mother's tone made Rebecca move. She locked the front door, then the back, then checked every window on the first floor. When she returned to the living room, Margaret was pulling books off the shelf, revealing a hollow space behind them. Inside, a gun, old but clearly maintained. Rebecca's voice came out strangled. "Mom, what the hell? His name isn't David Richardson. He works for a private intelligence contractor called Blackthorn. They specialize in cleaning up Cold War loose ends, elimination operations disguised as natural deaths or accidents. He's here to kill me and retrieve information I've been protecting for 43 years. You can't know that. He was just..." His accent was perfect American English, but he pronated his rius the way native Russian speakers do when they're tired. His watch was a Vostok Kommandersky, Soviet military issue, vintage 1980s. And when he shook my hand, he pressed his thumb against my radial artery to measure my heart rate under stress. That's Spetsnaz technique. They teach it in deep cover operations training. Rebecca's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the couch. "Who are you?" Margaret checked the gun's magazine, her movements efficient and automatic. "I'm your mother, but a long time ago I was someone else, Someone who knew things that powerful people want to disappear, and I've been hiding in plain sight for 4 decades by making everyone think I was ordinary. The dementia is real, partially. Margaret's expression softened for just a moment. I really am starting to forget things, Rebecca. Small things at first. Names, dates. Yesterday I couldn't remember how to tie my shoes for about 30 seconds. It came back, but it's happening. The performance was just me accelerating the appearance of something that's actually occurring, making people think I'm further gone than I am. Why? Because the code I carry, the information in my head, it's useless if people think I've lost the ability to access it. Who would torture or interrogate a woman with advanced dementia? She can't tell you what she doesn't remember. Rebecca's voice cracked. But you do remember. Most days, not all days, which is why we're running out of time. A car engine started outside, not David's rental. A different vehicle, parked 3 houses down. Margaret moved to the window, staying to the side of the frame. There's a second team. They're establishing perimeter coverage. How can you... Black SUV, tinted windows, engine running but not moving. That's Overwatch position. They're waiting to see if I run. Margaret turned to her daughter. Rebecca, I need you to listen very carefully. In the next 2 hours, one of 3 things will happen. 1, they'll attempt a soft extraction. Convince me to go for a medical evaluation that I won't return from. 2, they'll stage an accident, gas leak, house fire, car crash. Something that eliminates both of us and destroys any physical records. 3, they'll breach and clear, make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. And what do we do? Margaret smiled, and for the first time Rebecca saw the woman from the photographs, the operative, the survivor. We do what I should have taught you years ago. We fight back. What happened next unfolded in 90 seconds. That would change Rebecca's understanding of her mother forever. David Richardson returned to the house 20 minutes later, this time without the clipboard. He knocked politely. When no one answered, he used a lockpick gun on the front door. Professional, efficient, nearly silent. He entered the house with his weapon drawn, a suppressed Glock 19 held in a 2-handed grip that spoke of countless hours of training. He cleared the entry, the living room, the kitchen. And then Margaret Hayes stepped out of the hallway closet and put a gun to the base of his skull. Drop it. To his credit, David didn't startle. He lowered his weapon slowly, set it on the floor, and raised his hands. Mrs. Hayes, this doesn't have to be difficult. Then leave. You know I can't do that. Who sent you? Blackthorn is just the contractor. Who's paying the bill? David's jaw tightened. You really don't remember, do you? The index you helped hide. Someone's been accessing it, small sections at a time. We've tracked 17 breaches in the last 6 months. Someone has your code, Catherine, and they're using it to blackmail current operations. Margaret's gun hand trembled. That's impossible. The code is in my head. Only my head. Then explain how someone in Prague accessed Berlin sector files 2 weeks ago using your exact cipher pattern. Margaret's mind raced through possibilities. Had she written something down? Told someone, or had she forgotten doing so? The gun lowered just an inch. It was enough. David moved like liquid violence, spinning inside Margaret's reach, his hand clamping down on her wrist. But Margaret had been trained by people who wrote the manuals David learned from. She let him take her gun arm, used his momentum against him, and drove her knee into his solar plexus with enough force to crack ribs. David stumbled back, gasping, and Rebecca, who had been hiding behind the couch exactly as her mother instructed, swung a cast-iron skillet into the side of his head. David Richardson crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Margaret zip-tied his hands and feet with ties she'd prepared earlier, then dragged him into the bathroom. Rebecca stood in the hallway, shaking, the skillet still gripped in both hands. I hit him. You saved my life. I hit a man with a frying pan like something out of a cartoon. You adapted to a threat situation and neutralized the danger. You did perfectly. Margaret touched her daughter's face. Sweetheart, I need you to breathe. Can you do that? Rebecca nodded, gulping air. Good. Now I need you to get the go bag from under my bed, blue duffel, and grab your phone, your wallet, and any medications you need. We have approximately 8 minutes before his team realizes he's compromised. Where are we going? Margaret looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw the young woman she'd raised standing beside the operative she'd once been. To finish something I should have finished 40 years ago. The story is almost complete, but the most critical moments are still ahead. If you've made it this far, it means you're invested in Margaret and Rebecca's survival, and that tells us you're the kind of person who appreciates stories that don't pull punches, that don't hand you easy answers. So here's what we need you to do. Stay until the very end. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button. Because if you've loved this story so far, the final chapter will absolutely blow your mind. We're going to reveal exactly what Margaret's code unlocks, who's been using it, and how a 72-year-old woman and her accountant daughter take on an organization that's eliminated dozens of people far more dangerous than them. The ending will surprise you, we promise. Don't click away now. Seattle. 48 hours later, Margaret and Rebecca sat in a rental car outside a glass and steel office building in the Belltown neighborhood, watching the entrance with the patience of people who had nowhere else to be. They'd driven through the night after leaving David Richardson unconscious and secured in Margaret's bathroom. No interstate highways, no hotels, back roads and rest stops, paying cash, using the tradecraft Margaret remembered like muscle memory. Rebecca had asked 100 questions. Margaret answered them all. About Anton Resnick and the code that lived in Margaret's memory. About the 17 people she'd eliminated between 1979 and 1991, some guilty, some innocent, all necessary. About the daughter she'd wanted to protect from a life that consumed everything it touched. And about the one detail that David Richardson's interrogation had revealed. Someone was using her cipher system, which meant someone had access to her memories. "Explain it to me again," Rebecca said, her eyes fixed on the building entrance. "How is this possible?" Margaret rubbed her temples, fighting through the fog that came and went like weather now. Anton's code was built on personal memories, specific detailed moments, the day his daughter was born, the address of his childhood home, the exact words his wife said during their first argument, things that couldn't be guessed or calculated. "And you memorized all of his memories?" "I had to make the code work, but I also added my own layers, created a hybrid system, half Anton's life, half mine. It was the only way to make it truly unbreakable. You'd need intimate knowledge of two people who never should have intersected." "So how is someone accessing it?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "There's only one way. I told someone, showed someone, taught someone enough of the system that they could reverse engineer it. But you said you never—" "I said I never told the agency. I never said I was alone." Rebecca turned to stare at her mother. "Who?" Margaret pointed to the building. "Him?" Through the glass doors, a man in his late 60s emerged into the Seattle morning. Silver hair, expensive suit, the confident bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Jack Devereaux, Margaret's handler, the man who'd recruited her, trained her, and sent her to Berlin 45 years ago. "I thought he was dead," Rebecca whispered. "So did I. But David mentioned Blackthorne was operating under contract from a former agency executive with personal interest in the Berlin files. There was only one person who knew exactly what I'd done, who I'd protected, and what I was capable of remembering. Your handler." "My partner." Margaret's voice carried decades of complicated history. "Jack and I worked together for 12 years. I trusted him with things I never told anyone else, including fragments of the code. Not the whole system, but enough that a brilliant analyst with 40 years and modern computing power could reconstruct it." "Why would he betray you?" "Because the Cold War ended, Rebecca, but the leverage didn't. Those files, the ones the index points to, they contain evidence of crimes committed by people who are now senators, CEOs, intelligence directors, people with power, money, and everything to lose. Jack realized that my code wasn't obsolete. It was a goldmine. So he's been blackmailing people. And using me as his scapegoat. If anyone tracks the breaches, they lead back to my cipher pattern. I become the threat. I become the one who needs to be eliminated. He stays clean." Rebecca processed this. "The dementia. Is it real?" "Yes. Getting worse also, yes." Margaret's hands trembled slightly. "Yesterday I couldn't remember your middle name for about 5 minutes. It came back, but each time I lose something, there's a chance it won't return, including the code." which is why we need to end this today, before I forget how. Jack Devereaux walked to his Tesla parked in the executive section. He moved like a man without enemies, without fear, without any awareness that his past was sitting in a rented Honda Civic 60 feet away. Margaret pulled out a phone, a burner they'd bought at a truck stop, and dialed a number she'd memorized in 1984 and never forgotten. Jack answered on the second ring. "Who is this?" "Hello, Jack." 10 seconds of silence. Then, very quietly, "Catherine, you sent Blackthorne to kill me. That wasn't very friendly. You're supposed to be confused, incapacitated. David said..." "David is zip-tied in my bathroom in Portland with a concussion and a bruised ego. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "Then I'll make this simple. Meet me at Pike Place Market in 2 hours. The original Starbucks. Come alone or I release everything." "You don't have access to..." "You've been using my code to blackmail 17 high-value targets over the past 6 months. Senator Patricia Morrison, my daughter's namesake, by the way, nice touch, paid you $400,000 to bury evidence of her involvement in a 1987 arms deal. James Chen, current CIA deputy director, paid you twice that to hide his Berlin defection offer to the KGB. Should I continue?" Margaret could hear Jack's breathing change. Fear, anger, calculation. "You're bluffing. The dementia comes and goes. Today's a good day. Tomorrow might not be, which is why we're doing this now. 2 hours, Jack, or I walk into the Washington Post with every name, every crime, and every dollar you've extracted. Your choice." She hung up. Rebecca stared at her mother. "You don't actually have that information." "No, but Jack doesn't know that. He'll come because he needs to know what I remember, what I've documented, and whether I'm still dangerous." Margaret checked her watch. "And when he comes, we're going to give him exactly what he deserves." Pike Place Market at midday was a chaos of tourists, fishmongers, and street musicians. The smell of coffee and seafood mixed with the salt air from Puget Sound. Margaret and Rebecca positioned themselves at a table outside the original Starbucks, coffee cups untouched, eyes scanning the crowd. Jack arrived exactly on time, alone as instructed, but Margaret spotted the telltales immediately: the slight bulge under his left shoulder, the way his eyes mapped exits, the phone in his hand that could summon backup with a single button press. He sat down across from Margaret, his expression carefully neutral. "You look good, Catherine. Better than I expected for someone with dementia. And you look successful. Private consulting must be lucrative." "It has its moments." Jack's eyes flicked to Rebecca. "Your daughter." "Rebecca, she knows everything." "That was unwise." "Probably, but wisdom was never my strong suit. I preferred survival." Jack leaned back, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. "So, what do you want?" "I want you to stop using my code, destroy whatever reconstruction you've built, and disappear. And in exchange, I don't destroy you." Jack smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You always were direct. I appreciate that. But here's the problem, Catherine. The code isn't just yours anymore. I've shared the methodology with 3 other analysts. If something happens to me, they continue the work. You can't stop this by eliminating me." "I don't want to eliminate you, Jack. I want to obsolete you." "Meaning?" Margaret pulled out a small notebook, not one of the old cipher books, but something new. She slid it across the table. "That's a complete documentation of Anton Resnick's original cipher system, before I modified it. The pure version. Enough information that any competent cryptographer could reconstruct the base methodology in about 3 months." Jack picked up the notebook, flipped through pages of symbols and notations. His expression shifted from dismissive to alarmed. "You're going to publish this?" "I'm going to give it to the International Cryptography Archive. Public domain. Once the base system is public knowledge, your blackmail operation collapses. Anyone can access the files. The leverage disappears. The secrets become historical footnotes. You'd expose yourself, your entire operational history. I'm 72 years old with progressive dementia. What are they going to do, prosecute me? I'll forget the charges before the trial starts." Margaret's voice hardened. "But you, Jack, you're healthy, sharp, and very much culpable for extortion, blackmail, and conspiracy to commit murder. How do you think that plays out for you?" Jack set down the notebook. This is a bluff. You'd never expose those files. The collateral damage would be significant. Careers destroyed. Reputations ruined. Some very powerful people would face consequences for things they did during a war that ended 3 decades ago. Margaret shrugged. But I've been thinking about consequences a lot lately. About the 17 people I killed. About the lies I told. About the life I stole from my daughter by hiding who I was. And I've concluded that maybe some consequences are overdue. You've changed. I'm dying, Jack. Not today, probably not this year, but my mind is going. One neuron at a time, one memory at a time. And before I forget everything, I want to remember that I did one thing right, that I stopped someone from using the worst parts of my life to hurt people. Jack studied her face for a long moment. You mean it? You'd actually burn it all down? Without hesitation. Even knowing it destroys your daughter's mother. Once those files are public, everyone will know what you were. What you did. Rebecca spoke for the first time. I already know what she was, and I know what she is now. That's enough for me. Jack looked between the two women. Margaret saw the moment he accepted defeat, a slight relaxation in his shoulders, a shift in his breathing. What do you want from me? A confession, recorded, detailing your blackmail operation, your reconstruction of my code, and your contract with Blackthorn to eliminate me. You send that recording to an attorney I designate, with instructions to release it if anything happens to me or Rebecca, ever, for any reason. And the notebook stays with me, insurance. If you honor the agreement, it never sees daylight. If you don't, it goes public along with your confession. Mexican standoff. Mutually assured destruction. You should be familiar with the concept. Jack pulled out his phone and spent 5 minutes recording a confession that would end his career and possibly his freedom. He sent it to the email address Margaret provided. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked at Margaret with something that might have been respect. You were always the best of us, Catherine, even when you were pretending to be the worst. I wasn't pretending, Jack, that was the problem. He walked away through the crowd of tourists, who had no idea they'd just witnessed the end of a 40-year intelligence operation. Rebecca exhaled slowly. Is it really over? The immediate threat? Yes. The rest of it? Margaret watched Jack disappear into the market crowd. We'll see. But we bought ourselves time, and time is the one thing I can't afford to waste. They drove back to Portland that afternoon. Margaret's hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear now, but from genuine neurological decline. Rebecca noticed but didn't comment. Some silences were more supportive than words. 3 weeks later, Margaret sat in Dr. Coleman's office for a follow-up assessment. The test showed what Margaret already knew. The dementia was progressing. Slowly, but inexorably. We're seeing deterioration in short-term memory formation and some executive function decline, Dr. Coleman explained. The medications are helping slow the progression, but Margaret, I want to be honest with you. This is going to get worse. How long? Until what? Until I don't remember who I am. Dr. Coleman's expression softened. Years, most likely, 5 to 10, but the trajectory varies enormously between patients. Some decline rapidly, others plateau for long periods. There's no way to predict your specific path. Margaret nodded. She'd eliminated targets with less certainty about timelines. That evening she sat with Rebecca in the garden, watching the sunset paint the Portland sky in shades of amber and rose. They didn't talk much. Rebecca had learned that her mother communicated as much through silence as through words. Finally, Margaret spoke. I need to teach you something. More spy stuff? Memory techniques. Ways to encode information so you can't forget it even if you want to. I'm going to transfer everything I remember about the code, about my operations, about the people and places that mattered, and you're going to hold it for me. Why? Because someday soon I'm going to forget, and when I do, I want to know that someone I love remembers for me. Not the classified information, we're letting that die with me, but the personal things, the real things, the memories that made me human instead of just an operative. Rebecca took her mother's hand. Tell me about Anton Resnick, the real story, not the operational report. And Margaret did. She talked about a linguistics professor who loved his grandchildren more than he loved his country. About a young woman so desperate to prove herself that she almost committed murder to advance her career. About the moment when two people on opposite sides of a war chose mercy over mission. She talked until the sun set completely and the stars came out above Portland. And Rebecca listened and remembered and held tight to the hand of a woman who'd spent 40 years hiding, but who finally, in the time she had left, was choosing to be seen. 6 months later, Margaret Hayes forgot Rebecca's name for the first time. It came back after 30 seconds, but both of them knew what it meant. The code was degrading, the memories were fragmenting. The woman who'd been Catherine Wright, Eleanor Volkov, and a dozen other identities was slowly, inevitably, becoming just Margaret again. But on good days, and there were still many good days, she would sit with Rebecca and tell stories. About Berlin, about Anton, about Jack and the missions and the impossible choices. And Rebecca would write them down, preserving in ink what neurons could no longer hold. It wasn't the ending Margaret had imagined when she fled Prague in 1991. It wasn't the perfect operational outcome, the clean exfiltration, the hero's welcome. But it was something better. It was real. It was hers. And it was enough. 3 years after the confrontation in Seattle, Rebecca sat with her mother in the garden one afternoon. Margaret looked at her with eyes that no longer always held recognition, but still held love. She smiled, squeezed Rebecca's hand, and said softly, "You have kind eyes. I feel safe with you." Rebecca smiled through her tears. "I'm glad, Mom. You are safe. You always will be." Some truths transcend memory. Love is one of them. And despite everything, the lies, the violence, the decades of deception, Margaret Hayes finally knew peace. Not because she remembered everything she'd done, but because she'd chosen, in the end, to be honest about who she was. And for both of them, that was more than enough. And there you have it, the story of Margaret Hayes, a woman who became a weapon to serve her country, then spent 40 years pretending to be ordinary, only to discover that the most extraordinary thing she ever did was choose her daughter over her secrets. We want to hear from you. What did you think of Margaret's journey? Could you forgive someone who hid a lifetime of violence behind a grandmother's smile? Tell us in the comments, and please share your name, your city, and your state. We love knowing where our viewers are watching from. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it kept you watching until the very end, then do us a favor. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a like. Share this with someone who appreciates stories that don't give easy answers, because we're just getting started. The next story we're preparing will take you inside the mind of someone you'd never suspect. Someone whose secret is even more impossible to believe. We'll see you there. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. And thank you for remembering Margaret Hayes, even if someday she can't remember herself.